Free Palestine. That should have been said already. I'm always going to cheer for the little guy. Whomever is in flip-flops is my rule of thumb. The good guys are still shooting Soviet-era AKs. Bad guys have future guns. Okay. What would you do when they send the drones to your neighborhood? It's only theoretical for now, only hypothetical for us. We get to sort of speak about something as if that's a fictional hypothetical, like a Lord of the Rings question. Was Luke Skywalker a terrorist for fighting the Empire? What is going on? Sauron would have labeled Sam and Frodo terrorist, I believe. Enough pop culture reference. Just kidding. Open Google Images, Gaza 2025, Gaza 2026. People who condemn Hamas don't know Starship Troopers is satire. They worry how Robin Hood's thieving might be hurting King George's war tax effectiveness. Hurting his bottom line. Infinite Jest, page 181. This one cracks me up. Open me another one of those, boy, and I'll tell you the highlight of that season of my season tickets was I got to see that incredible son of a bitch shed his first record in the flesh. It was your brother's Cub Scout troop out and you wouldn't join because I remember this. You were afraid you'd lose the online time in front of the TP, remember? Well, I always remember this one day, boy. It was against Syracuse, 8 seasons back. The little son of a bitch had a long of 73 that day and an average of 60-9. 73 for Christ's sake. Open me another one, boy. Use the exercise. I recall the sky was cloudy. When he punted, you spent a real long time studying the sky. They really hung. He had a long hang time of 8.3 seconds that day. That's serious hanging, boy. Me, I never hit 5 in my day. Christ. The whole troop said they never heard anything like the sound of the son of a bitch's 73. Juan Richardson, you will remember Wani, the troop leader whatever, petroleum jelly salesman out of Brooklyn. Wani's a retired pilot from the service, from a bomber squadron. Wani weighs down at the pub that night. Wani says, he says that 73 sounded just like fucking bomb sounded. That kind of quacking whump when they hit. To the boys in the squadron, in the planes when they let them go. The radio show right before Madam Psychosis' midnight show on MIT's semi-underground WYYY is Those Were the Legends That Formerly Were. One of those cruel tech college-eat formats where any U.S. student who wants to can dart over from the Super Collider Lab or the Fourier Transform study group for 15 minutes and read on air some periodic thing where he'd pretend to be his own dad, apotheosizing some sort of thick-necked, historic, athletic figure the dad admired and by implication compared with woeful distaste to the pencil-necked, big-headed, asthmatic little kid staring up through Coke bottle lenses from his digital keyboard. And we'll take a breath. I will. Let's see. Organize. They call out people. It's conspiracy theories here, okay? If you want someone to talk about what Charles Manson was up to for 3 hours, just type that into YouTube and you'll have dozens of options, and you can get the full audio books on YouTube yourself here. I'm here to weave a picture, paint a picture. I was thinking about Infinite Jest in the last few months as sort of a device to train the reader to sort out and pick up clues. Much like Infinite Jest, the real world is overstimulating, and you're presented with thousands and thousands of little sort of tidbits of data, news flying in, and celebrity quotes at all times, dozens of talking heads. And they fill our minds with all this chatter, and out of it we're supposed to hopefully have some type of understanding of the world at large and pick up the right clues for what they are, and know which bits of detritus to throw back to the sea. So I will not be concise. I will not be particularly focused. Where was I reading today? Someone was talking about a liberal arts education as the point being to freely think with your own mind, and that to merely study for a vocation, a job, and work that job, that's all fine and good, but that is sort of man's base nature. And I will find it in the reading at a pause and probably bring it back in. It might have been Henry David Thoreau. It was had some fascinating writing. But, it does bring to mind of what I've been thinking about the First Amendment, which is, if you're going to live in a superpower that's been the strongest in the world for hundreds of years, and you're going to have free speech, it's a bit pathetic to never use it to say anything worth saying. Never put any sort of stretch on it. And I've come to see that as cowardice. I think to some degree that is really baked into our country to keep our opinions locked up in our pocket where they won't get you in trouble. And that is, it's embarrassing. It's boring. If I can inspire any of my friends to put their art out, put their own ideas out there, I would. I keep muting the freaking microphone that Mama bought for Christmas. Okay, we're back. Have you ever dropped acid in the desert? It sounds a little dusty for me. That's me personally. I'll lean back from the mic, turn up your volumes, everybody. Reading from Henry David Thoreau. On the last days of John Brown. Now, John Brown is probably somebody who will get an entire episode in the future. Thoreau has a lot of respect for a man, and especially literary respect for this guy who, as he says, was not particularly educated, but in the last 6 weeks of his life, awaiting trial, he manages to write a lot more clearly and with more truth than most so-called academics. Page 286 of the Essays of Henry David Thoreau. When I looked into a liturgy of the Church of England, printed near the end of the last century, in order to find a service applicable to the case of Brown, I found that the only martyr recognized and provided for by it was King Charles I, an eminent scamp. Of all the inhabitants of England and of the world, he was the only one, according to this authority, whom that church had made a martyr and saint of. And for more than a century it had celebrated his martyrdom, so-called, by an annual service. What a satire on the church is that! Look not to legislators and churches for your guidance, nor to any soulless incorporated bodies, but to inspirited or inspired ones. What avail all your scholarly accomplishments and learning, compared with wisdom and manhood? To omit his other behavior, see what a work this comparatively unread and unlettered man wrote within 6 weeks. Where is our professor of Bell's Letters, or of logic and rhetoric, who can write so well? He wrote in prison, not a history of the world, like Raleigh, but an American book, which I think will live longer than that. I do not know of such words uttered under such circumstances, and so copiously withal, in Roman or English or any history. What a variety of themes he touches on in that short space. There are words in that letter to his wife respecting the education of his daughters, which deserve to be framed and hung over every mantelpiece in the land. Compare this earnest wisdom with that of poor Richard. The death of Irving, which at any other time would have attracted universal attention, having occurred while these things were transpiring, went almost unobserved. I shall have to read of it in the biography of authors. Literary gentlemen, editors, and critics think that they know how to write because they have studied grammar and rhetoric. But they are egregiously mistaken. The art of composition is as simple as the discharge of a bullet from a rifle, and its masterpieces imply an infinitely greater force behind them. This unlettered man speaking and writing are standard English. Some words and phrases deemed vulgarisms and Americanisms before he has made standard American, such as it will pay. It suggests that the one great rule of composition, and if I were a professor of rhetoric, I should insist on this, is to speak the truth. This first, this second, this third, pebbles in your mouth or not. This demands earnestness and manhood chiefly. We seem to have forgotten that the expression, a liberal education, originally meant among the Romans one worthy of free men, while the learning of trades and professions by which to get your livelihood merely was considered worthy of slaves only. But taking a hint from the word, I would go a step further and say that it is not the man of wealth and leisure simply, though devoted to art or science or literature, who in a true sense is liberally educated, but only the earnest and free man. In a slave-holding country like this, there can be no such thing as a liberal education tolerated by the state. And those scholars of Austria and France who, however learned they may be, are contented under their tyrannies, have received only a servile education. Nothing could his enemies do, but it redounded to his infinite advantage, that is, to the advantage of his cause. They did not hang him at once, but reserved him to preach to them. And then there was another great blunder. They did not hang his four followers with him. That scene was still postponed, and so his victory was prolonged and completed. Final page. Theatrical manager. No theatrical manager could have arranged things so wisely to give effect to his behavior and words. And who, think you, was the manager? Who placed the slave woman and her child, whom he stooped to kiss for a symbol, between his prison and the gallows? We soon saw, as he saw, that he was not to be pardoned or rescued by men. That would have been to disarm him, to restore to him a material weapon, a sharp's rifle, when he had taken up the sword of the Spirit, the sword with which he had really won his greatest and most memorable victories. Now he has not laid aside the sword of the Spirit, for he is pure Spirit himself, and his sword is pure Spirit also. He nothing common did or mean upon that memorable scene, nor called the gods with vulgar spite to vindicate his helpless right, but bowed his comely head down as upon a bed. What a transit was that of his horizontal body alone, but just cut down from gallows tree. We read that at such time it passed through Philadelphia, and by Saturday night had reached New York. Thus like a meteor it shot through the Union from the southern regions towards the north. No such freight had the cars borne since they carried him southward alive. On the day of his translation I heard, to be sure, that he was hung, but I did not know what that meant. I felt no sorrow on that account, but not for a day or two did I even hear that he was dead, and not after any number of days shall I believe it. Of all the men who are said to be my contemporaries, it seemed to me that John Brown was the only one who had not died. I had never heard of a man named Brown now, and I hear of them pretty often. I never hear of any particularly brave and earnest man, but my first thought is of John Brown, and what relation he may be to him. I meet him at every turn. He is more alive than ever he was. He has earned immortality. He is not confined to North Elba nor to Kansas. He is no longer working in secret. He works in public and in the clearest light that shines on this land. I say amen. Thoreau seems to be a few steps ahead of much of the country, and we can appreciate, hearing about living through the revolution of John Brown. Here again, folks, I regret to say, I wish I could say I'd read more John Brown books. I know W.E.B. Du Bois, a friend of mine, has told me has a wonderful biography of John Brown. Before this, Thoreau has a plea for Captain John Brown, which I imagine I will get to at some point as well. I do have a final work to wrap up this podcast. In terms of closing remarks for today, I want to remind everyone that much of our favorite characters on any side of the political scheme are best assumed to be agents of the state, i.e. deceivers. I don't know if there's a more clear way to say what I'm getting across about the Ivy Leaguers, the so-called elite media deceivers, liars. Guys, if they are able to legalize heroin, they will do it, and you will get advertisements in the mail and on your doorstep. I suppose that's what's at stake here generally, and the best I can hope for this podcast is to train up people with a high natural curiosity and maybe a little bit of pattern recognition when they look out in the world to let's be more cynical about advertising. How do we run those guys out of town? Let business work on its own. Can you imagine? You just have to decide for yourself where you want to get dinner. No messages blasting into your brain. Anyway, advertising, of course, is just one small facet of sort of a larger issue. The point I'm sort of trying to get to is that literature and fiction, of course, nonfiction is going to be priceless. I think I find there's so many people doing the, great history on the JFK assassination. I mean, I could go on for at least a little while about the moon landing. I Googled yesterday about the computer, Apollo 11, Apollo 13, maybe it was the first one, put a man on the moon. Apparently had about 1/millionth of the RAM of an iPhone and about 100,000th of the other whatchamacoo. I suppose I could pull it up on my phone. And I found that interesting to, try to land a rover on the moon with a computer that, there's no calendar app. Where they're like, yeah, we don't actually have the processing power. Do you know when handheld calculators were invented? It was the 1960s. They figured out how to put a calculator into a portable product and started doling that out. And, we went to space essentially with a barely working calculator that you wouldn't even give a child today to pass 5th grade. So I've let myself ramble on a bit, but I think if we had gone to the moon in the 60s, the Chinese and the Indians would both have sports facilities on the moon today, and they would be playing cricket, Aussie League football, maybe a bit of soccer. We can hope for space soccer, and we can dream of space soccer. I think the speed of play would be fascinating. So, guys, my closing piece here is going to be as clearly as I can show you the stakes here and what I believe to be an invisible war going on. In terms of where I want to focus, this is sort of the black hole that the ship goes out and around and comes by and whips on by. And to heft this out of the darkness, the secret cults that run our world, we're only going to be able to touch on them and find hidden footprints that feel right. We're going to be taking a look at the Phoenicians. Here's Jorge Luis Borges, The Cult of the Phoenix. Those who write that the cult of the Phoenix had its origins in Heliopolis and claim that it derives from the religious restoration that followed the death of the former Amenhotep IV, cite the writings of Herodotus and Tacitus and the inscriptions on Egyptian monuments. But they are unaware, perhaps willfully unaware, that the cult's designation as the cult of the Phoenix can be traced back no farther than to Urbanus Maurus, and that the earliest sources, the Saturnalius say, or Flavius Josephus, speak only of the people of the practice or the people of the secret. In the conventicles of Ferrara, the Gregorovius observed that mention of the Phoenix is very rare in the spoken language. In Geneva, I've had conversations with artisans who did not understand me when I asked whether they were men of the Phoenix, but immediately admitted to being men of the secret. Unless I am mistaken, much of the same might be said about Buddhists. The name by which the world knows them is not the name that they themselves pronounce. On one altogether too famous page, Moklosic has equated the members of the cult of the Phoenix with the gypsies. In Chile and in Hungary, there are both gypsies and members of the sect. Apart from their ubiquity, the two groups have very little in common. Gypsies are horse traders, pot makers, blacksmiths, and fortune tellers. The members of the cult of the Phoenix are generally contented practitioners of the liberal professions. Gypsies are of a certain physical type and speak, or used to speak, a secret language. The members of the cult are indistinguishable from other men, and the proof of this is that they have never been persecuted. Gypsies are picturesque and often inspired bad poets. Ballads, photographs, and boleros fail to mention the members of the cult. Martin Buber says that Jews are essentially sufferers. Not all members of the cult are, and some actively abhor pathos. That public and well-known truth suffices to refute the vulgar error, absurdly defended by Ehrman, which sees the root of the Phoenix as lying in Israel. People's reasoning goes more or less this way. Ehrman was a sensitive man. Ehrman was a Jew. Ehrman made a habit of visiting the members of the cult in the Jewish ghettos of Prague. The affinity that Ehrman sensed proves a real relationship. In all honesty, I cannot concur with that conclusion. That the members of the cult should, in a Jewish milieu, resemble Jews proves nothing. What cannot be denied is that they, like Hazlitt's Infinite Shakespeare, resemble every man in the world. They are all things to all men, like the apostle. A few days ago, Dr. Juan Francisco Amaro of Paysanduro pondered the ease with which they assimilate, the ease with which they naturalize themselves. I've said that the history of the cult records no persecutions. That is true, but since there is no group of human beings that does not include adherents of the sect of the Phoenix, it is also true that there has been no persecution or severity that the members of the cult have not suffered and carried out. In the wars of the Western world and in the distant wars of Asia, their blood has been spilled for centuries under enemy flags. It is hardly worth their while to identify themselves with every nation on the globe. Lacking a sacred book to unite them as the scriptures unite Israel, lacking a common memory, lacking that other memory that is a common language, scattered across the face of the earth, diverse in color and in feature, There is but one thing, the secret, that unites them, and that will unite them until the end of time. Once, in addition to the secret, there was a legend and perhaps a cosmogonic myth, but the superficial men of the Phoenix have forgotten it, and today all that is left to them is the dim and obscure story of a punishment or a pact or a privilege. Versions differ, but what one may dimly see in all of them is the judgment of a God who promises eternity to a race of beings if its men, generation upon generation, perform a certain ritual. I have compared travelers' reports. I have spoken with the patriarchs and theologians. I can attest that the performance of that ritual is the only religious practice observed by the members of the cult. The ritual is in fact the secret. The secret, as I have said, is transmitted from generation to generation, but tradition forbids a mother from teaching it to her children, as it forbids priests from doing so. Initiation into the mystery is the task of the lowest individuals of the group. A slave, a leper, or a beggar plays the role of mystagogue. A child, too, may catechize another child. The act itself is trivial, the matter of a moment's time, and it needs no description. The materials used are cork, wax, or gum arabic. In liturgy, there is mention of slime. Pond slime is often used as well. There are no temples dedicated expressly to the cult's worship, but ruined cellars or entryways are considered appropriate sites. The secret is sacred, but that does not prevent it being a bit ridiculous. The performance of it is furtive, even clandestine, and its adepts do not speak of it. There are no decent words by which to call it, but it is understood that all words somehow name it, or rather, that they inevitably allude to it. And so I have said some insignificant thing in conversation, and have seen adepts smile or grow uncomfortable because they sensed I had touched upon the secret. In Germanic literatures, there are poems written by members of the cult whose nominal subject is the sea or twilight. More than once I've heard people say that these poems are somehow symbols of the secret. Orbis terrarum est speculum ludi, goes an apocryphal saying reported by Ducang in his glossary. A kind of sacred horror keeps some of the faithful from performing that simplest of rituals. They are despised by the other members of the sect, but they despise themselves even more. Those, on the other hand, who deliberately renounce the practice and achieve direct commerce with the deity command great respect. Such men speak of that commerce using figures from the liturgy, and so we find that John of the Rood wrote as follows: Let the 9 firmaments be told that God is delightful as the cork and mire. The 9 firmaments be told that God is delightful as the cork and mire. On 3 continents I have merited the friendship of many worshippers of the Phoenix. I know that the secret at first struck them as banal, shameful, vulgar, and stranger still, unbelievable. They could not bring themselves to admit that their parents had ever stooped to such acts. It is odd that the secret did not die out long ago, but in spite of the world's vicissitudes, in spite of wars and exoduses, it does, in its full awesomeness, come to all the faithful. Someone has even dared to claim that by now it is instinctive. I would say if you don't understand the secret, maybe you need to watch Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's movie, once or twice. Perhaps Barry Lyndon once or twice as well. I don't know YouTube's roles exactly. I think, it should be mentioned this is his collected fictions, aka we're all talking fictional. I don't really buy it here. And with a lot of his work, I don't really buy that he's using fiction as any more than a tool to speak the truth. about abuse cycles, and I think it's easy to trivialize sort of a culture of routine abuse over generation after generation, but this is a culture that reveres the Greek thinkers as the the highest possibility of wisdom and knowledge and reason, and what was their standard of beauty, that the most beautiful thing to be attained on this earth, and it was boys. So we decided to give those guys the high place as the greatest thinkers in all of mankind. And of course I speak in large generalizations, but what can you say, really? I mean, I don't remember it even being mentioned in college, like, by the way, these guys were all, regularly abusing their, pupils, students. And once you look at that tradition, and then you sort of hear a few various accounts of British boys' school going to, dormitory life, sending them off to dormitory life, and I suppose I'll somewhat stay out of the sexual abuse, if only to make this something that can stay on YouTube and doesn't. I wouldn't want to upset anybody here, but I shall warn you that this subject is going to keep coming up. So if you're here and you're sticking around, know that this isn't going to be the whole show, but it's also not something we can completely avoid. This cult of the phoenix, this which I believe to be just okay, muted again, and we're back. I believe to be basically abuse cultures that have passed down through thousands of years, and these cultures can do quite a bit of explaining why Hollywood pumps out such sort of mind-numbing, brainwashed drivel when it could be full of life and human moments. You could actually have role models in movies. I know that's pastiche. I need to look up this dang word I keep going for. Cliche, corny. And I think back to the Infinite Jest piece I've read in one of these episodes about sort of the American spy having skin reactions every time he hears a sincere statement, giving him hives and being noted by the Quebec spy. I mean, what can we say? In some ways, this is the best way to understand culture, is to understand sort of this psychopathic abuser role, and we wouldn't be able to have Greek life if we didn't have a need to produce men who could beat each other up and piss on each other in mud pits, say. These types of disgusting acts that remain in our culture, and far be it for me to be Judge Judy on this. And another mute. Okay, I'm going to try not to press that mute button. We're going to get a little bit of ASMR. And we're back. Well, folks, that was the Cult of the Phoenix. And, discreetly, I will be circling this subject for a long time, looking for more answers to give you the key code. So, again, the reason this is disorganized and it feels like someone stumbling through dozens of texts towards a greater truth is because that is what is happening. We'll have to read the Aeneid, book 6. It looks like it is the one I have. Y'all, I'm hoping to be reading ancient Greek in a few years, but let's be honest, that's going to take a long time if it ever happens. So we're gonna stick with translations. I mean, I don't have my own, unfortunately. To wrap up, we'll probably give you a song, start giving you, either a cover or an original at the end to play us out. I have no ads yet, but as soon as this kicks off and hits like 3 million views, I'll probably start selling t-shirts. And what song shall we do tonight? I hope you liked Wilco. It got stuck in my head for a few days, and it is a melancholy tune. So I can't apologize for anything. Guys, keep reading good books. I don't think life is long enough to be reading drivel or crap, and the more of this I put into my veins, the less I need, TikTok. Can delete Instagram for a few days, take a few days off to work on the keyboard, work on the next episode. I'm looking to do, I suppose, half an hour to an hour a week and produce. And one day soon I might be adding some kind of visuals, but for now, this is what it is. Please ask your questions. I do have a lot of conspiracy theory opinions. I've read a lot of good books, but there's a lot more that I have never read or don't know. And as always, as I've probably mentioned, if you want to be on the show, let me know. These microphones are $40, y'all. Find somebody with a MacBook. I don't even own one yet, okay? We're going to work on that. Got a lot of skills to develop, but, debate me on some ancient book or debates, a joke we can discuss. Anything you want. I love some ancient poetry, some ancient mythology. I've been reading Jason's Adventures in the Argonautica by Apollonius Rhodius. He was accused of sort of being like an Avengers writer, just kind of taking all the great gods and then they rip around Greece having an adventure in the real world. Basically not being a real poet, not being pretentious enough. And, you're always going to be either too pretentious for somebody or not pretentious enough for somebody else. So, that's life. They're a lot of fun. Lots of fun. And maybe I'll read them to you guys. I think I'm tempted to just start doing full readings. My girlfriend was mentioning the possibility of just reading out Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, which is tempting, I imagine. I think I looked it up. Other people have done it. It's like 12 hours. That would be a day's work. I would need stimulants, possibly. And, it's already been done. Bit of a lefty swing for me there. But, I like to get viewpoints from every angle, so I don't have a whole lot to say, guys. I'm going to wrap it up and say good night And if anybody knows of a group of brilliant intellectuals who are discussing these things, let me know. Over and out. I wrote this next one. I call it The Waltz. Over the garden wall, shimmy up the terrace, your face on the windowsill, prettier than Paris, and we walked on. Tell me just what you want under the scarlet